Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be in Unit 3, Day 3, and the main focus of what we're going to do today is going to be talking about revolts that happened here in the colonies. To start with, though, we're going to do a little bit of review talking about the South again, and then we will jump in to talking about those colonial revolts that happened. So, in Southern colonies, I just wanted you to look through at these questions and just answer these kind of to your own. Again, these are reviews of what we have already talked about. So I encourage you, just pause this for a second, read through these and see if you can answer these questions about the South. So again, pause, take a second, look at those, and we're going to move on. All right, so whites in the colonies. You're going to see, especially in the South, you have what is known as the Southern gentry class. And those are going to be your more wealthy. Those are going to be your more prominent in society. They're usually going to be the ones that own a lot of land and own a lot of slaves. And with this group, you actually get here in Virginia what is known as the first families of Virginia. I have a list on here that shows just some of the names, but these are going to become names or be names that are going to be very prevalent in Virginia history and U.S. history. So you're going to have family names such as Washington, the Lee family, the Carter family, the Jefferson family. These are all going to be families that take a very prominent role, and they are known as the first families of Virginia. And in fact, if you go and look up a list of the first families of Virginia, you'll see a lot of the counties in Virginia are actually named after, or their names originate from some of these first families of Virginia. So the Southern gentry, in order to prevent rebellion, they did do a lot of attention to the concerns of poor whites in several different ways, but that is a group that they realized that they had to reach out to and accommodate in some way to prevent them from getting upset with the political situation. You will see the planter elites did have authority over black slaves and the yeomen during that time. That's something you could say goes right back to the old style and the old system of doing things over in England. And you also see by 1770 that a majority of English Chesapeake families would own a slave. Now, if you were on the lower side, you weren't one of the really wealthy people. You usually only owned one or two slaves, whereas your landed elite tended to own a lot more slaves. And again, they were trying to appease the poorer whites in society. So oftentimes they did reduce the taxes for poor whites and were giving them the right to vote. And again, intentions weren't totally pure because they did want to keep this group happy so that there would not be rebellion. And probably the greatest example that you will see as a representation of the gentry class and the practice of gentility would be William Byrd, who is pictured there as he is always held up in history as kind of the model of what this gentry class was like in society. Georgia would be the last of the colonies. It would be founded as a defensive buffer between South Carolina and Spanish Florida there. Really, the big purpose, though, for Georgia is that Georgia was used as like a prison colony. The English would send thousands of people to Georgia. Rather than imprisoning them over in England for debt, they would send these debtors basically over to Georgia. That would help with the prisons in England and basically get rid of a problem for them. And you're going to see that was something very common that the English did. That's how Australia really got its start, was being a place that the English would send prisoners to as well to relieve overcrowding within their own prison system. The colony did grow very, very slowly. Again, it would be considered more on just the outback type area almost. And it would grow very, very slowly. And by the Revolutionary War, it would still remain the smallest of the colonies as far as population would go. But again, it was that important for the English to have that buffer between South Carolina, which would become very prosperous, and Spanish Florida. So interactions between classes and races in the colonies. You're going to see that during this time, as we talked about before, that the different groups are interacting in ways that they never had before. Europeans, Africans, Native Americans, all, again, before these groups had never really encountered each other in a big way. So you're going to have that cultural interaction happening. And with that, you're going to have conflict, as you often have conflict between different groups that aren't used to interacting with each other. They have different ways of doing things. things, live different ways, and you're going to have some sort of conflict being there. So what you're going to be doing today is you are going to first complete the graphic organizer. You're going to pick one of these rebellions and complete the graphic organizer on that. And then you're going to research the event in more extent. And again, based on that event that you covered, create an interesting way that you would present that to a class. You could make a video, you could do a slides presentation, whatever. It is up to you how you want to go about doing that. So however you do that, you can submit that to me right through Canvas. So now we're actually going to jump in and quickly talk about these presentations or about these revolts that you will be doing more research into. So first, Pueblo Revolt. This would happen in 1680, and this would be led by an Indian shaman. His name was Pope, and he was really representing the unhappiness that a lot of the natives had with forced Christianity. There had been a big drought that had been in place, as well as food shortages because of that drought. And remember how we talked about how some Indian groups, they embraced Christianity until drought and food shortages or anything like that happened, and then they would basically turn their backs on Christianity at that point. So Pope, with this rebellion, he plans this out. Basically, the way that he planned it out was the varying tribes in their area. He would take a rope, he tied knots in it, and each day they would untie a knot. When they got to the last one, that was the day of the revolt. With this Pueblo's revolt, you're going to have 24 Pueblos who are able to kill over 400 Spaniards and drove away thousands more. Now, the reason the Pueblo revolt is so important is because it did drive the Spanish away, and it is considered that because of that, it helped to save the Pueblo culture in that area. And when the Spanish did finally come back, they were much more responsive and respectful of the rights of the natives because of this revolt. And in fact, because as a way to show how important Pope is in Congress, every state gets 2 statues in Congress to represent people from their state. New Mexico, one of their statues is of Pope, and again, because of what he did to help preserve Pueblo culture in that area. The next revolt we will be talking about is Powhatan's Uprising. This would happen here in Virginia in 1622. You would have Opechancanough, I'm not very good at saying that name, who would lead a Powhatan uprising, which killed 347 English, which at that time was a third of the population. This was a complete surprise to the colonists that this was happening. There would be some English colonists that would be kidnapped that would eventually be returned. And they are who we have a lot of the stories of this Indian uprising / massacre that would happen. So this is important because as a result of this, you're going to see James I would make Virginia a royal colony, be ruled by a royal governor and elected assembly. The Anglican Church is put in place over them, and property owners would start paying taxes to help support clergy in the area. And again, the colonists would respond to this. Eventually, you would get an agreement, a treaty between the colonists and the natives in that area. But really, this is important because it's the end of a joint stock company controlling the Virginia colony. All right, next up, Bacon's Rebellion, the most tasty of the rebellions, I say. So here in the Virginia colonies, you had social tensions between the wealthy planters on the coast and the laborers. You also had tension between the wealthy planters and the people living in the mountainous areas of Virginia. So the Virginia governor at the time, William Berkeley, he was giving tax-free land grants to members of his council. So that was happening, which a lot of the more poor in society did not like that. But probably the bigger issue is that poor white freeholders of land wanted Indians removed from the land and removed from this treaty-guaranteed lands that they were supposed to get in the western frontier. The wealthy opposed this idea, partly because the wealthy knew that it was going to lead to conflict with the Indians, and partly because a lot of the wealthy had made their own agreement with native tribes, and they didn't want it to upset that or upset money that they were making off of that relationship. So this really, the focus and cause of this rebellion is going to be this issue of the wealthy in the eastern part of Virginia, not protecting the interests of the more poor in the western part of Virginia during that time, specifically protecting them from the natives in the area. So in 1675, finally, you're going to see freeholders and people that don't own property. They form their own militia and start killing Indians. Honestly, how do you expect the Indians to respond? Indians are going to then attack them back. So as a way to try to appease the freeholders and propertyless men, Berkeley then proposes building frontier forts. The reason he had done this, again, is because the killings slowed the trade of fur and other things with the native tribes during that time. And he saw this as a way that he could hopefully appease the poorer in society in the western part of Virginia. Settlers, though, did not like this idea because they saw it as a plot to impose high taxes on them, saying, hey, we're providing for your defense, we're going to put in place high taxes, and to take control of the tobacco trade as well, which both the tobacco and fur trade very, very big, tobacco being bigger here in Virginia. So Nathaniel Bacon, who is a member of the governor's council at that time, he decides to lead a protest of Berkeley's idea. Bacon and his men would march out and actually kill peaceful Indians. Now, this is known as Bacon's Rebellion because he kind of did push the charge and lead it, although he would be quickly captured and arrested, and he would later die in prison of dysentery. That did not mean the end of the rebellion, though. Before he died in prison of dysentery, his supporters were threatened to free him. Berkeley did agree to some political reforms in response to that and gives voting rights to the landless freemen during this time, but they were still not satisfied. Bacon's men would march on Jamestown. They would issue a declaration of the people wanting the removal of all natives and an end to the rule of the wealthy, and they would actually burn Jamestown after marching on it as well. So why is this rebellion so important? You will see, though, that the rebellion does eventually settle down, and it gets put down by the governor of Virginia, and concessions on both sides led to that as well. So why is this important? One, it leads to tax cuts here in Virginia. You will see a reduction of corruption within the government. It also opens up some public offices for the yeomen and basically your lower farmers in society being able to hold those offices. It does lead to an expansion into the native lands. And probably the biggest thing to come out of this, and the reason that this is very, very important, is to prevent a future rebellion. Slavery would be legalized later in 1705. This would prevent a rebellion because if you remember, this rebellion was started by many of the poor whites in society. A lot of these people had formerly been indentured servants, had been given their freedom, and now were living out in the western part. And it was seen that by transitioning to the slave system versus the indentured servant system, that there would be more control. Because if you think about it, a slave never gets their freedom, whereas an indentured servant, after working for a period of time, does get their freedom from the contract that they had before. And this rebellion really does highlight two long-standing disputes within Virginia, and yet is very sharp class differences between the wealthy and the landless and poor farmers. And these are going to be differences you're going to see even through the Civil War here in Virginia, and also colonial resistance to royal control and the pushing back against what the royals were trying to do here in Virginia. You can kind of say this is sowing some very, very early seeds for the American Revolution. Again, very, very early. So just a little bit of, very tiny bit of seeds. Next up, we're going to have the Pequot War. These are going to be the Puritans and the Pequots fighting, and the Puritans would see themselves justified in taking Indian lands on religious grounds because they felt like that they were superior to the Indians, and that because the natives were not Christians and did not believe in God, that they could take that land from them. So you are going to see the Pequot or Pequot warriors would attack the English in 1632. Puritan militia and Indian allies would actually massacre 500 Pequot Indians in that time. And you're going to see this is one of the examples of the Puritans are often portrayed as being pretty peaceful towards the Indians, but they did make certain alliances with certain groups, certain Indian groups to fight against other ones. And this is an example of that. After this, the Puritans would create what is known as praying towns to help supervise the Indians that was in that area. And the reason that they treated them this way is, again, they wanted to have control over them. They wanted to see that they were the ones in control of the natives and making sure that something like this did not happen again. Next up, King Philip's War, which is also known as Metacom's Rebellion. You're going to see by the 1670s, there are going to be 3 times as many whites as natives in New England. You can see the numbers there, 55,000 to 16. And the Wampanoag leader, Metacom, he forms this military alliance with 2 other native groups during that, and they decide that it's about time for them to take back some of their land. So they start by attacking white settlements throughout New England through 1676. They do have some mixed success with this, but overall, you're going to see that this doesn't achieve the goal that they wanted. Metacom would die, and with his death, you would kind of see the end of this rebellion. So the results of this, 25% of the Indians involved in this would die from war or disease through it. And this is really going to be the last major time that you're going to see any Indian resistance within New England. And you're actually going to have the Algonquin Indians who migrate further north and begin trading with the French as a result of this. And this is very important because, again, I've mentioned before, the French would really develop the best relationship with the natives versus the Dutch and the English and any other groups. And this is going to be one of those things that's going to help solidify that for them. Lastly, here we have the Stono Rebellion. And what was the Stono Rebellion and why was it important? Well, this would be the largest slave uprising of the 18th century. We're jumping ahead a little bit because this wouldn't be till 739. And this would occur for several different reasons. One being lack of African education. Of course, African Americans were not given an education at all. So some of this is going to come out of ignorance because they were believing rumors that they heard that they didn't know weren't true. And then also, you have slaves just in general being upset about their treatment here in South Carolina. And one thing to understand about the slave system was that in South Carolina, in an area where they grew rice, you had a large number of slaves die frequently because of diseases. Because when you grow rice, you grow that in water. That breeds a lot of mosquitoes, which then share illnesses, and so you had a large number of Africans that would die there with that. So because of that, again, slaves were very upset about their treatment, how many of them were dying. So there would be a group of rebels, rebel natives, who joined together to fight. It's called the Stono Rebellion because it had happened on the banks of the Stono River. And really what they were trying to do is go to Florida, and they thought that they would be able to meet up with the Spanish there who were promising them freedom. Now, the Stono Rebellion would end after they had marched and killed up to 20 whites during this time. The rebellion ended when a white militia actually caught up with them, killing some of them, and then was able to disperse the rest of them. And the important thing to realize with any of these slave rebellions that are going to happen that we're going to talk about in U.S. history, that things eventually, in response to that, get much, much worse for the slaves. Generally, you're going to have some sort of laws created that enact some sort of punishment on them for being a part of that. So you would see here, if you look at actually this historical sign here, it says South Carolina soon enacted a harsh slave code in response. You will see the same thing happen here in Virginia. When you have slave revolts here in Virginia, the Virginia General Assembly would respond in much the same way. So people always ask and wonder, why didn't slaves fight back more often? Well, generally, you're going to see slaves are going to be more covert with the ways that they fought back against their owners versus armed rebellion and that kind of thing, which generally in the end didn't work out well for them. So you're going to see the way that slaves most often fought back was things like working slowly, accidentally breaking tools, and doing different things along that nature versus doing a full-scale rebellion as well. So hope you enjoyed doing that project and are able to find out even more information than what I have shared about with you about these rebellions. I hope you have a fantastic day.